When we envision the hub of AI, our minds usually jump straight to Silicon Valley. Glossy server rooms, sleek coastal tech offices, a group of guys sitting around talking about the future. But the reality is the physical toll of AI, the power-hungry data centers and the resources needed to fuel them, is landing squarely on rural America and on indigenous lands. Big tech is pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into securing land, power, and water to fuel this AI boom. There's even talk of reopening old nuclear power plants like 3 Mile Island, and expanding uranium mining on native lands just to feed the machine. What in the sci-fi dystopia is going on? This brings up a terrifyingly familiar historical pattern: extraction. Are these communities going to be treated as raw materials for a tech boom that they don't get to benefit from?
We actually have a new digital divide.
Or will they be the ones who actually shape it?
This is made by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, with Indigenous people.
Welcome to Life with Machines. I'm Baratunde Thurston, and my hands are freezing. I love doing this outside. It's the best place to talk about AI. In this episode, made in partnership with Young Futures, we're moving the AI conversation out of Silicon Valley. Literally. We're going to look at how rural and indigenous youth are leveraging AI for local empowerment, protecting their resources from a new wave of extraction, and defining what it means to have digital sovereignty. The expansion of artificial intelligence is driving an historic surge in data center spending, creating a massive demand for land, water, and power. And for rural America, this presents a massive trade-off. If these communities take a rigid, not in my backyard approach, they could miss out on generational economic opportunity. I'm talking about the kind of growth that can fund schools and governments for decades. On the other hand, if they accept these projects without a plan, without restrictions or oversight, well, then they risk draining their local resources, driving up energy costs, and losing their small town character. So, what's the solution? How about we equip the youth in these communities to be builders and not just bystanders? You prepare them to lead. And that's exactly what Charlotte Dungan is doing. All right, so Charlotte is the Chief Learning Officer of the Cuban Foundation. She runs these AI boot camps for high school students and, this is important, their teachers. Now for her Young Futures project, she's partnered with 4-H National to bring AI education directly to rural youth. But she's not just teaching them basic coding skills or AI literacy.
I actually think what many people are trying to do is like AI literacy, which is this very basic level 1 type of education. We actually target AI agency, which puts people in the driver's seat. And I'm not sure Silicon Valley always wants us to be in the driver's seat.
That means teaching teens to apply AI to the realities of their own communities, like using it to optimize local small businesses, or support land management, or even map out search and rescue operations. And when you do that, you actively fight against brain drain. You prove that they don't have to move to the coast to find advanced opportunities. And Charlotte students are already demonstrating this.
A student who came to our student boot camps in Arizona was interested in this intersection of AI and healthcare.
Okay.
And he has a family member with Parkinson's. And so he began learning drug discovery using AI tools. And he built a model that is testing different drug design models.
I'm out here vibe coding apps to help me keep up with my to-do list, and this kid's out here solving Parkinson's. Now another student built a platform called Hustle and Hub, a way to connect high schoolers to local job opportunities and essentially disrupt Craigslist. And this last one's my favorite. There was this student who was really into boats, so she built an AI model to help people identify boats by their image and their sound. Yeah, she made Shazam for boats. To me, this reveals that there's something much more grounded going on here. I've been impressed by a lot of the AI app development of kids in cities. A lot of my friends have kids who live in cities, but I'm equally impressed by what these rural kids are building. Practical tools and fun experiences on their own terms. But with all that excitement, Charlotte points out a critical vulnerability. We're handing teens the keys to the car without showing them the rules of the road.
We actually start with children, like teaching them how not to be hit by cars. We don't talk about them driving yet. We have all these structures in place for people to drive safely, and we have none of those structures in place for people to use technology safely, knowing that they are not accurate. Like we say hallucination, but that's an error. And that error rate is 10%. We would never put a car on the road if it had that many errors.
So if you're a parent or a teacher in a small town and you're feeling bombarded by and intimidated by AI, just take Charlotte's advice. Ask a teenager what they're seeing. And here's a pro tip from Uncle Tunde over here. Give the kids some plausible deniability. Ask them what their friends are up to with AI. They're more likely to be honest if they have that kind of cover. Ultimately, Charlotte's work proves that there are other values worth prioritizing besides speed and profit. It's about designing a better society, not just better technology, and grounding it in two simple principles: kindness and safety. This push to prioritize human experience and defend local resources isn't just happening in rural farm towns. This exact same battle to define how technology should be used is playing out on sovereign indigenous land. Indigenous people have survived centuries of colonial extraction. Today, it's the water and power required to run these massive data centers, but it's also the data itself. And as always, tribal nations are pushing back and offering alternatives. We're seeing this massive movement for digital sovereignty. Tribal nations are creating legal frameworks to make sure they own their data, that they can protect their cultural knowledge, and that they can control the algorithms which affect their citizens. Doesn't that sound like something we want all of our governments doing? We're even seeing indigenous-led tech companies like CyberCloud AI. They're building sovereign AI factories. These are data centers built on native land where the people retain majority ownership and control. But to truly achieve digital sovereignty, you need a generation ready to lead it. And that's where Taysha Zentech comes in.
Bojo, Jajakwi Nashnabe Noswin, Taysha Zentech and Dejanakas, Shawnee, Oklahoma, Dochbia, Oklahoma City, Adayan, Mako Dodem, Nishnabe and Dao Shishibanyak Independagwes. So my Potawatomi name is Jajakwi, which means like a crane, but my English name is Taysha. I'm originally from Shawnee. I live in Oklahoma City now. I'm Bear Clan, and I am a citizen of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation.
Yeah, you are.
And then I work for ACES as the Managing Director of Programs.
As a Young Futures grantee, she launched the Auntie Tech Collective. This is a multi-generational initiative equipping Indigenous girls, women, non-binary, and two-spirit people to thrive in tech. But she's intentional about avoiding the corporate jargon that we're so used to hearing when it comes to technology.
So we have what we are intentionally calling waterways. We're trying to avoid using language of pipelines or even pathways. We want to be really rooted in our language. We have a waterway for PK-12, and those are the Auntie Tech clubs. Okay. We have a waterway for our post-secondary. Those are the future aunties. And then we have the aunties who are professionals.
Taysha's work actively pushes back against this idea that Indigenous America is stuck in the past, that it's relegated to museums. She reminds us that Indigenous people aren't just one with nature, they're also scientists.
I think the first thing that's important for us at ACES to acknowledge is that our ancestors were the first scientists, and even specifically technologists. We have these really beautiful examples of our ancestors both understanding their place and space and approaching it in a very scientific way, and being willing to incorporate and integrate new things that were introduced to them.
Her approach is about the beautiful complexity of honoring tradition while simultaneously adapting to change. Just like the traditional regalia worn today incorporates materials that didn't exist 200 years ago, Indigenous youth can integrate AI without losing who they are. But when it comes to the massive physical footprint of AI, Taysha is cautious not to come across as some spokesperson for all of Native America.
Part of that decision of how to use AI may very well be that they do not want to use AI. My home state in Oklahoma, the Seminole Nation has already passed a law that they will not allow data centers on their tribal lands. And then you have a sister tribe to mine, the Forest County Potawatomi up in northern Wisconsin, who own their own data center. You see the entire spectrum here, even in just those three tribes.
Taysha's focus on building technology collectively and on Indigenous terms reminds me of one of the most powerful conversations we had in the first year of Life with Machines. We spoke with Michael Runningwolf, a Northern Cheyenne and Lakota technologist who's using sovereign AI to preserve and extend the life of endangered Indigenous languages. Michael warned us about the dangers of tech companies swooping in to extract data without honoring the rights of the people. He told us, what if you treat language like it's land? It's something you own. Data is land, data has value. Both Tasia and Michael are fighting the same battle. They know that big tech's thirst for data threatens to repeat some dark historical patterns.
The colonial project is an extractive project, and the resource that was most extracted was and continues to be land. I think understanding that and understanding why there are folks who are so hesitant or advocate so harshly against data centers, because that feels like another extractive moment.
You could approach it with the regenerative agriculture mindset
Yes.
and rotate the crops and tend to the land.
It's also teaching folks how to be stewards of that land, right? To be data stewards.
Tasia's showing me that when you prioritize digital sovereignty and ground tech and cultural wisdom, AI isn't just some tool of erasure. It can actually become a powerful ally in self-determination. If you only look at AI through Silicon Valley's eyes, you see a tool for extraction, mining our data, our water, our power to feed a machine that only benefits the few. But when you put these exact same tools into the hands of young people who are deeply connected to the land, whether they are 4-H kids in rural farming communities or indigenous youth grounded in traditional ecological knowledge, you get a completely different kind of technology.
What I hope that we're promoting and ensuring is that we can maintain those pieces of what make us Indigenous, those values, those ways of knowing and being, while also evolving to understand that technology and how it can even enhance who we are as people.
We're already seeing this happen in the real world. Up in Sanikiluwa, Canada, a custom AI system is actively combining Indigenous knowledge, satellite imagery, and Western science. They're doing this to map prime habitats for scallop, kelp, and clams in areas hard hit by climate change. Down in South America, an initiative called Project Guacamaya is using solar-powered microphones, camera traps, and bioacoustics to monitor real-time soundscapes, protecting biodiversity in the forest and accelerating conservation in the Amazon.
Tools are only as good or as bad as the people who design and use them and the systems that we build around them. So we have choices to make in the world that we want. Everything that we build, is this decision in my company making the world safer? Is my decision making being kind toward people and the earth? Maybe we would build a better planet. It doesn't mean we stop turning on the electricity. It just means maybe we think about when.
Charlotte is exactly right. When AI is designed with a clear cultural and ecological purpose, it doesn't have to sever our connection to the earth. It can do the opposite and enhance that connection, with the eventual goal of shifting us into powerful allies rather than threats. The future of AI is not limited to coastal elites. It's happening in the heartland, in Indian country, even on a farm. Charlotte and Tasia are showing us that society doesn't have to accept a digital divide. But avoiding it requires intention. It requires funding, intergenerational mentorship, and respecting the fact that the people closest to the land might just have the best blueprint for our relationship to the digital world. The youth are stepping up, but they shouldn't have to do it alone. Now, if we want a future where AI serves humanity, we adults got to step up too. We need to act as allies and coaches, not just obstacles and referees who blow the whistle when something goes wrong. We can't repeat the mistakes of social media and exclude the voices of young people who are living closest to these challenges and to these opportunities. They deserve the agency to co-create the world that they're going to inherit. And that requires real investment, which means we have to fund the people closest to the problem. Organizations like Young Futures and the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund are doing exactly that by backing grassroots, youth-led innovations. Young Futures is putting their money where their mouth is with the YF 500. This is a philanthropic index fund committing $50 million over the next 5 years to back 500 organizations committed to helping youth thrive in a tech-driven future. So, if you're a student, a parent, an educator, or anyone who cares about our collective future, go check out how you can get involved with Young Futures and see how they can help fund your initiative. And on a personal level, just start with an honest conversation about AI with the young people in your life. Ask them how they use it, how their friends use it, how it makes them feel, and what kind of world they want to build. We're figuring out how to live with machines, but remember our goal is to live with each other. Thank you for watching this special series. To all the young builders out there, we see you, We believe in you, and we're gonna do our best to make sure that this tech-filled future that we're handing you is one in which you can truly thrive. If you want more from us, Life with Machines is building a community of people who wanna live well with technology, not just endure it. We're not asking what's next for AI. We're asking what's next for us. So join us at lifewithmachines.media. I'm Baratunde Thurston, and I'll see you next time. Peace.